it is now just 2 days away from the exam. We have today, we have tomorrow, and then we have paper one of history. And man, like, I feel like in a weird middle place right now. I feel like I'm okay, but I feel like I still need to do quite a lot. So what we're doing today is I want to revise theme 4. Then what we can do tomorrow is, obviously I don't want to be, learning new stuff tomorrow. So I'll just recap over everything. All of theme 2, all of theme 3, and theme 4. Because obviously I don't know what format the paper is going to be in. We could get asked a choice between theme 1 and then 2, which would be nice, and then it would be a choice between 3 and 4, which would be lovely. What I'm dreading is a choice between theme 1 and 4, because those are the themes that I know the least about. Obviously theme 1 is politics, economy, work opportunities, things that, I'm not going to be able to get in my head over the next 48 hours. So, yeah, as a result, I just need to drill in as much as I can about theme 4, so that as a worst case scenario, we get bad luck with the question layout. Hopefully it'll be okay. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions still. So, long-winded intro aside, theme 4 is divided up into 3 categories, and I'm likely to assume that we're not going to be asked a question on leisure or travel. Reason for that is because last year they asked a question about leisure and travel, and that was a word-for-word copy and paste of a 2018 question, which leads me to think that they're not going to ask, another leisure question again. Or if they do, it's going to be very different. They won't refer to cars or anything like that. So, as a result, I am more inclined to think that the theme 4 question is going to be on living standards or popular culture. So, living standards. I have already... Oh my god. I've skied it up. Oh no. Living standards very much ties to the economy. If you know the economy quite well, you are gonna nail the living standards topic. So, let us just put the interwars, obviously the impact of World War II, and the 50s all the way up until the end of the topic, 1979. Now, I always format my revision like this because it makes it so easy to write essays. You can compare specific things from different periods. So, in terms of the interwar period, I'm just going to jot down as much as I know just to begin, and then we'll obviously revise it. First thing is this idea that there are regional divides, okay? Divides between the North and the South. Usually the South is benefiting, the North isn't. So for example, there is a mini boom, mainly to do with things like electricity, but this primarily only benefits the South. So it's just the idea that, to begin with in the interwar years, living standards are a bit, The main thing with living standards is houses. Housing booms massively, with 4 million houses being built by both Labour and Conservative governments. That is a massive change. So housing booms. I'm just trying to remember anything else off the top of my head here. I know I'm going to miss a lot. In the interwar years, mainly it's very limited. Obviously with the Depression and the Wall Street crash, that is when, especially in the North, there are heavy job losses. In the manufacturing industry especially. Then you want to talk about things like rearmaments. And how In the late 30s, rearmament heavily benefited the northern industries. It pumped life back into them. So there's that extend to. If you got asked a question, how accurate is it to say that regional differences were the most significant factor limiting living standards? You could argue, yeah, it was, because the South mainly benefited from the booms. In the Depression, the northern jobs were hit the hardest. However, then you would also argue that rearmament benefited the North. It revived these industries that were dying. Also in the interwar years, it was this idea that children per family were basically halved, which led to more disposable income. Or a better word for that would just be more money. How would you describe this? Like, less people in the family to distribute the money. Oh, come on, it's some basic ass word. Just more money per family member, I think, would be the idea. More money per family member. So, also the idea that real wages rose, I believe. So it was this idea that, wages improved. There was a decrease in the amount of children people were having. Talk about the impact of World War One, how millions claimed disability benefits. The idea that rationing improved the health of the lower class. Increasing lifespan. So that's everything I can think of for the interwar years. We will come back to this. Then in World War II, you want to continue this idea of the total war. Total war. The idea of collectivism, which, we know a lot about. You could link back to a lot of questions. Total war, things like rationing. But one of the big ones is going to be the New Towns Act in 1946. So as a direct response to the Blitz destroying housing, you had the New Towns Act, which constructed a load of new houses. There was also the Emergency Accommodation Act, which did the same thing, building new housing. So you could talk about that being an improvement. Don't know much else about World War II. Let's move on to the 50s and 60s. Let's talk about the austerity period. The austerity period was post-World War II, under the Labour government, and it was this idea that spending was cut by a third, or limited, managed. So a third of your spending was cut. There was still rationing of things like food and just general supplies. So spending was limited, rationing, period of austerity. So therefore you could argue that this limited consumer spending. Then we move on to the boom of the 50s. You could link this to, I think it's Macmillan, the never had it so good years. This idea that there was a consumer boom. Housing doubled, cars doubled. Obviously, your disagree is going to be that there was a crash in the 70s due to increased inflation. But mainly it's this idea that there was a boom in the 50s and the 60s, doubling the amount of housing bought, doubling the amount of cars bought. So it's a complete 180 to the austerity period of war. So let's go through now and let's go and fix this. So, yes, real income. So, firstly, we want to talk about how wages actually declined, but living standards improved. Prices went down, especially for food. So, cost of living. So, cost of living declined. Cost of living went down. Things like food prices. Real cost of living fell a third. Average wages doubled during World War II. Obviously, the idea of total employment as well, that is a significant fact. Increase in the use of contraception meant families shrank. Wages were shared between fewer people, so money went further. That's the word I was trying to say. Money went further. So the size of families reduced. Housing. 4 million homes were built. A growth of homeowning. This idea that homeowners went from about 10% to 30% of the population owning homes. Effects of a Blitz. Millions of houses were destroyed. You had the Temporary Accommodation Act, prefab homes, and the New Towns Act. So that was the impact of the war. Health and diet. Millions died during the war, millions injured. 40% were exposed to being fit. Diets improved due to rationing. Infant mortality halved. Regional variations. Industrial areas fared far worse than areas with large service sectors. So traditional industries suffered a lot, especially during the Depression. Employment rose. Beveridge figured out that 85% of all long-term unemployment was in South Wales, Scotland, and North England. So, that's this idea that 85% of long-term unemployment in North. So you want to talk about the idea that the North was mainly the old industries. Old manufacturing industries. And these old manufacturing industries are not faring well against the newer, more service-based industries. Regional variations in the means test. Car ownership was more common in the southeast, so you want to talk about that. Cars, how more common in the southeast of London. The boom and the idea that there was far less electricity consumption in the north. 96% of homes had electricity. So you want to talk about how this mini boom mainly impacted the South because of a greater electric consumption. Labour saving devices was mainly for the middle class. World War II austerity, clothing rationing. Life became more drab. A quota was controlled, so 30% of consumer spending was controlled. Then its real disposable income rose by 30%. So disposable income rose 30%. Home ownership. Mass advertising and credit. So this idea that advertising, the growth of credit Credit Acts made it far easier. So yeah, Consumer Credit Act. The Consumer Credit Act paved the way for a massive credit explosion. Credit cards begin to get used. So it's this idea of greater consumer spending. And then obviously there was a crash in the 70s due to inflation. So, let's just go through this. If you get a question on this, it is likely, so we could pitch a lot of questions here. You could say, what are the differences between, how significant were the differences post-World War II to pre-World War II in terms of living standards? And you could argue, yes, it was significantly different because, in the interwar years, there was a massive regional divide. Labour-saving devices were mostly for the middle class. In the mini boom, it was mainly the South that benefited from it. In the Depression, a lot of northern jobs were lost in manufacturing industries. But then you could say both had developments. Housing rose, real wages rose, cost of living got divided by a third. You could get asked a question on regional differences being the most significant factor of limiting living standards. And you could say, yeah, it was significant. Mainly, long-term unemployment was in the north. Job losses in the Depression, rearmament benefited all. That would be your counter. Another argument would be then the austerity period limited it. Another argument could be the crash and the economy itself. So honestly, living standards aren't that difficult to follow. It just depends what question you get asked. Because if I got asked a question on, mass advertising and credit was the most significant factor of improving living standards in the 50s to 70s, then you could argue, no, actually, the most significant factor was the rise of disposable income, Shit, that would be a horrible question, actually. What could you talk about? I guess just a rise of housing, the end of austerity. So anyways, that would be living standards. Obviously, tonight I will go over that fully and revise it. Finally, the last thing I want to do, and then I'm going to spend the next hour just revising in general, is entertainment and popular culture. So this is the radio. This is the cinema. This is music. TV. And youth culture. Now, to be honest with you, I hate this topic. I hate this topic with a burning passion. Mainly because it's just so damn boring. So, let's just get through this one quickly. Popular culture, entertainment. I'll go through it first myself. I'll write some stuff, because I know some stuff. Cinema. There was a boom of cinemas after World War One. Things like the Battle of the Somme film were viewed by 20 plus million people in the first week. There was another boom in cinemas after World War II. You could talk about the decline of British made films. You could talk about how the Obscene Publications Act / Theatres Act enabled more violent or sexual content in the cinema. I wouldn't know what else. TV, the main one is Elizabeth II's coronation. Led, I think 26 million plus people to purchase a TV, about 16 to 20 hours a week spent watching the TV. Shows allowed the nation to get together because everyone was watching the same shows, so it became like, kind of a pastime. Brought together the nation, brought together the country. Obviously, you want to talk about the growth of things like how, was it ITV or like Sky TV, one of those. You could talk about how there was a report that made it so that, I don't know whether it was ITV or Sky TV, I literally don't recall. One of those was made to do things, so it made like theatre plays more accessible. Obviously the growth of colour TV. Theatre plays became more accessible. TV, you have a BBC, which was, news, information. I'm just kind of writing down spark notes here. There's not much depth to these notes, I am aware. I'm just writing what I know. Youth culture. Obviously you had things like the teddy boy culture, but then as time went on, teen culture began to expand, and it was reflected through things like milk bars, dance halls. Obviously you had things like the mods. Was it the mods and the rockers, I think? So these different types of expression. If I got a question on youth culture, I would probably kill myself because I don't know much about this. But it was this idea that teen culture began to become more expanded upon post-World War II. This idea that prior to World War II, teenagers weren't a thing even. You would literally just get out of school, go work. The radio, you could talk about the impact of pirate radio and how that then led to the, more traditional radio stations playing pop music or popular music. Same goes for music itself, like the impact of the Beatles, the idea of like this cult-like fandom. Radio, obviously, during the World War II was heavily impactful for providing news / info. And that's all I can remember. So let's have a look. So, cinema was the most popular form of popular culture. The number of cinemas rose from 3,000 to 5,000. There was a boom in World War II where people wanted escapism, so it provided escapism. People went about 28 times a year to the cinema. British film industry declined. Funding for the British Film Finance Corporation declined. Number of British-made films declined. So it was the dominance of American film. More violent and explicit films were released. Suggested that views on sex were becoming more liberal. So that links to liberal views. Which, again, in the liberal society, you get a question about the liberal society, you would talk about the Obscene Publications Act, the Theatres Act, and its impact. Half of cinemas in the country had to close due to the popularity. So half of country cinemas closed. And this was But then you could talk about how this was only temporary, most recovered. In terms of radio, you had national and regional. The BBC aimed to enrich and educate listeners and bring together national community. In World War II, it was the Home Service. Then you had, with radios, light program, which combined comedies, soaps, and it had about 11 million. So there were 11 million daily listeners. And out of those, a third listened to the light program, which was comedies, soaps, etc. Growth of pirate radio, because the BBC had a monopoly. So you had things like Radio Caroline, Radio Luxembourg. The light program split into BBC 1 and 2. The third program became BBC 3. So you want to talk about how, to begin with, the BBC held a monopoly, leading to an explosion of pirate radio. And the idea that then the BBC split in order to play popular music for a younger audience. So it's split into 3 different radio programs. So competition after the 1973 Act. Television exploded as a mass medium. 27 million, so I said 26 million, same thing. Sales were spurred because of the Elizabeth coronation. In the late 70s, people used to watch about 16 to 20 hours of TV a week. Men and women spent about a quarter of their leisure time watching. Television blurred class divisions because everyone watched the same programs. It was part of daily culture, daily conversation. In 1955, the BBC's monopoly ended, leading to 14 other radios. Oh my god. I sound like such a knob saying this. 14. So BBC held a monopoly in this as well. And then in 1955, it was the growth of 14 other. The Pillington Report forced ITV to screen news, plays, and affairs programs. So 1964 TV Act forced. Can you put? Yeah, what the hell is that? Forced ITV to screen news, plays, and current affairs. So, just kind of what I said. It made, news, things like that accessible. So, news, plays, affairs. Social realism. I forgot about that. Social realism in TV. Mocked the establishment, dissolving class boundaries. So TV became far more liberal. Then there were sitcoms. Working class were the biggest consumers of TV soap, with an audience of 20 million. so it was mainly enjoyed by the working class. Northern viewers identify with characters. Then we move on to music. So originally it's very much, traditional, normal music for that time. Then in the 50s it changes with the arrival of rock and roll. Elvis Presley introduced a more sexual kind of music. British companies responded with more safe artists like Cliff Richard. Rock and roll coincided with the birth of the teenager, so that is an important connection to make. Teenagers emerged because young people had more disposable income. So that's that. The Beatles starts just literally an entire section on the Beatles, okay? I guess you could just talk about the idea that they were insanely popular and the idea that British music was globally, respected. Then obviously the rise of glam rock, and then in the 70s it was more like punk music to reflect the changing time. Honestly, not a lot about music. If you were going to write a paragraph about music, don't. Like, there are way easier paragraphs to write about. So, hypothetically, if we now got a question saying, oh wait, youth culture, very quickly. The word teenager came to be used. Rise of school leaving age, so young people had more free time. Following the Butler Act, which raised the leaving age of schools to 15. Mass media widened the gulf of fashion between generations. Pirate radio shaped popular forms. So teenage leisure were things like cinema, dance halls, coffee bars, milk bars. Music appealed to young audiences. Youth culture was influenced by fashion and music. So it was this idea that the growth of mass media led to a distinct teenage culture. You had rockers, which was American style, mods, which was Italian style, and others such as, skinheads, punks, rockers. Many old people thought that youth culture was out of control. There was a slight rise in youth crime. So it was this idea that it was mainly due to cultural influences. So the rockers got heavy inspiration from America. The mods got heavy inspiration from Italian culture. So you had the Teddy Boys. I don't know why we need to know specifically what they looks like, but that's cool. Teddy Boys reflected a more traditional working class values. Whereas, mods and rockers, oh my fuck, were way more out there. Teddy Boys played a role in the Notting Hill Carnival, obviously, not Carnival, what the fuck, the Notting Hill riots, and teenage drug use was high. Youth-based subcultures became more visible. So the growth of teenage subcultures. And that is all that I can be asked to do. To be honest, we spent 35 minutes on this. That's more than enough time. I am now going to go and revise for about an hour to dump all of this information onto my revision document, get it all ready. And then I will probably attempt a question on popular culture tonight. because it's a topic that I'm dreading coming up, to be honest. But after this, it's probably not as bad as I thought, you know? Like, let's think about... Oh, wait, there's something else before I go. While I'm grabbing it. Yeah, if I got asked a question and it said cinema was the most influential, you know, form of mass culture, how far do you agree? Or something like that. You could obviously argue the TV was more popular. How, you know, half of country cinemas closed because of the impact of TV. But then you could obviously talk about something else. You could talk about how radio got the nation together. It introduced light programs. You could talk about the impact of pirate radio on developing youth culture. Like, they all tie together, which is very nice. What I was gonna grab is this. This is interesting. There's one or two things I missed when talking about welfare provision. Let's go through them. First one is there is an extension to national insurance going from 4 million to 11.4. You want to talk about the National Economy Act is the thing that introduced means testing. Family Allowance Act, we know. National Insurance Act, we know. Want to talk about pension increases. And that's basically it. So literally just the idea that national insurance in the interwar years was slightly extended. The Unemployment Act reversed the benefit cut, and you could apply for long-term unemployment assistance. So, I'm more than happy to end things here, guys. That has been helpful. Now I'm going to go revise. Take care.